Ladies and gentlemen, I have spent quite a lot of time showing you myths that parallel the Bible. I was accused of parallelomania by several people, both critical scholars and, of course, Christian apologists throughout the years. I came across the work of a scholar named Bruce Louden, who died from cancer not too long ago, a few years back. I would have loved to have interviewed him and to dive deep into where he's at today. I can't imagine where he would be and what he would have published if he would have still been around with us. He is one of the scholars who saw a dialogic or some intertextual relationship in some way, shape, or form between the Bible and Greek myth. We're not just talking about New Testament. He's written on that as well, with Luke, the Road to Emmaus story, paralleling the Odyssey. But the Joseph, the Jacob story in Genesis, and other stories throughout the Bible paralleling the Greek epic of the Odyssey and the Iliad. And of course, there are other stories as well. But I want to introduce you to him because, I feel like I owe him a bit of debt, if you will, for being someone who has written on these topics. You have Dr. Bruce Louden, professor in the Department of Languages and Linguistics at UTEP, and he is going to give you a lecture after this. The lecture is going to be from YouTube channel Sean Shokron, Ancient Greece and Ancient Israel, Bruce Louden. And what I want you to do, you can go subscribe. I'll put the link to his YouTube channel in the description. 12 years ago, and it only has 727 views. We're going to have more than 727 views easily within a few hours here on this channel. I wanted to introduce you to this brilliant scholar and to listen to him lecture. What I did is I downloaded the video. I enhanced the audio and removed background noise. So if you go and watch the original video, it's very hard to keep up with, very hard to understand what he's saying. The audio is good. Here's going to be yours and mine biggest hurdle: background knowledge. The hardest problem I have when I'm trying to explain that the Bible is in some way borrowing or paralleling other mythologies is that most people don't really know the Bible very well, let alone the stories that I'm trying to say are likely being influenced here, or at least there's some overlap and parallel, meaning they're in the same genre category. So you don't need to make an argument that they necessarily are genetic. Bruce Louden, in his book, specifically the book that he wrote, Homer's Odyssey and the Near East, which wonderful book. In his chapter 6, he actually is covering this kind of lecture. So if you want to read his book further, Odyssey 6 through 8, 10 through 12, 13, 1 through 87, and then Genesis 28 through 33, Argonautic myth, Odysseus and Nausicaa, Circe, Jason and Medea, Jacob and Rachel. This lecture is very complex if you don't know those stories, if you don't know those characters, but he's going to parallel the Bible with the Greek myth. Hebrew Bible, not New Testament, which would be obvious because we have New Testament written in Greek, Septuagint's in Greek, but we're talking the Hebrew Bible having parallels to stories that are in the Greek world. And his book actually goes deeper into this. I really, really love this. I hope you enjoy the lecture. I hope you pay attention as much as you can and try to understand what he's saying. If you really need a breakdown, get his book, Homer's Odyssey in the Near East, isn't it? And the Near East, yes. Chapter 6. And it'll break down. It gives you quotes. There's all sorts of cool stuff. There is much more where this comes from. Much more. And so we're still on a journey here at MythVision. Like the video, share the video, check out these scholars. And again, thank you, Bruce Louden, for the hard work you've done while you were still around.
Argonautic myths and Jacob's journey to Haran to win Rachel from Laban. The myths correspond in a number of specific earpiece and in homologies for the four main characters: Jason to Jacob, Medea to Rachel, Aetes to Laban, Hera to Rebecca, with the household gods of Laban corresponding to the Golden Fleece. Since the parallels strike me as too many and too close to describe the coincidence, I argue for interrelation and interdependence between the two narratives. The many Homeric allusions, with some that have not received consideration, point to a complete version of Argonautic myths prior to our Iliad and Odyssey. I will argue the Genesis account of Jacob is in a dialogic relation with some version, some form of Argonautic myth. I'll trace a sequence of 12 corresponding motifs and conclude by considering how the two myths may relate to each other. The hero's conflict over inheritance. Jason's myth begins, as frequent in Greek heroic myth. A usurper attempts to do away with the rightful heir by sending him away to perform a lethal task, as in the Iliad's version of Bellerophon. Heracles' labors for Eurystheus offer the fullest instance of this dynamic. In Jacob's dispute with his brother Esau, he himself, at his mother's urging, is the cause of the friction. His brother, enraged that Jacob cheated him out of his father's blessing and earlier induced him to sell his birthright, threatens to kill him, which prompts his journey. 2. The hero is morally ambiguous. Jason and Jacob display problematic morals more than most ancient protagonists. Both perform questionable acts against members of their own families. Jacob lies to his father and cheats his brother in order to obtain the former's blessing. Jason exploits Medea's love to win the fleece and slays her brother. Jason's subsequent career and inglorious end, again like Bellerophon and Iliad, may imply divine retribution for his deeds. An authoritative female directs his journey. Jacob and Jason both receive direction from a dominant female who helps guide events on their behalf. Hera supervises Jason's quest, repeatedly lending aid because he earlier helped her when disguised as an old woman cross a river. Rebecca corresponds to Hera, instigating Isaac's deception and directing Jacob's journey when Esau threatened to kill him. Rebecca's manipulation of Isaac also parallels Hera at Iliad 19 for manipulating Zeus into swearing an oath that applies to Eurystheus, not to Heracles. Both protagonists now journey to the east. Gods appear in theophany to the hero. Both protagonists on both directions of their journeys receive visits or appearances from gods. Glaucus, rising out of the sea, appears to the Argonauts when they quarrel over having left Heracles behind. He resolves their quarrel and validates their quest. On return voyage, Theus appears. Jacob also receives theophanies, both directions of his journey. En route at Bethel, he has the dream of the ramp to heaven, in which God declares he gives the land to Jacob and his descendants. On his return, angels appear to him. Later, at the ford of Gabak, he wrestles all night with a man, not loosening his grip until the man blesses him. Triton's theophany to the Argonauts in their return voyage corresponds both to Jacob's dream and the complementary encounter at the ford. Triton appears to the Argonauts in Libya, offering a clod of earth as a guest gift. Euphemus receives the clod and asks for directions to the sea, which Triton provides. After a further sacrifice, he reappears, thrusting the Argo forward to the sea. Euphemus then dreams of the clod, seeming to turn into a young woman with whom he has sex, who resembles his daughter, but declares herself to be Triton's and bids him to set her down, that is the clod, in the ocean. She will always help him and his descendants. Euphemus throws the clod in the sea and it becomes the island Thera, Euphemus its patriarch. Both gods proclaim very similar futures. Both dreamers will be patriarchs. Quote, I, the Lord, am the God of Abraham. This land, to you I shall give it into your sea. I am with you, and I will guard you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. Triton's daughter imparts corresponding information. Triton's offspring I am, nurse of your children. Fate has willed you a great and splendid honor. When you throw this clod into the sea, the gods will make it an island, and it shall be peopled by your children's descendants. Each god identifies him or herself. Each connects the dreamer with his future land. Each declares he will be that land's patriarch with innumerable descendants. Each promises future aid and protection. The clod also corresponds to Jacob's stone, his pillow during his dream, which he sets up as a pillar or an oil over it dedicated as the first stone for a later temple. 5. The heroes establish cultic ideologies. Jason and his crew perform acts that are foundational for the ancient audience, setting precedents for why certain customs are practiced. Helping King Kuzikos and the Doliones defeat monstrous opponents, they sail away, but violent waves drive them right back without their knowing. Mistaken for invaders, in the confusion, they slay many, Jason killing the king. Subsequently, the Doliones eat uncooked food, not grinding the grain, which present-day Ionians commemorate in ritual. Preceding passages offer etiologies of a still visible tumulus and the tears of Kuzikos' wife gathered by nymphs into a fountain. Jacob's myth does similar. Episodes explain rituals practiced by the ancient audience. Like Jason, Jacob has such encounters on his way east and on his return. The famous dream concludes with a cultic etiology, an explanation for the existence of a cultic center, earlier known as Luz, now renamed as Bethel. His most relevant cultic etiology concludes his mysterious wrestling with God episode, which, as for the Doliones, provides an etiology for a dietary practice. When he wrestles the mysterious man, Jacob dislocates his hip. The encounter concludes with 3 ideologies. His new name, Israel, makes him eponymous ancestor of his people. He renames the locale Peniel. Finally, an ideology of a dietary prohibition. Quote, the children of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh which is by the hip pocket to this day, for he had touched Jacob's hip pocket at the sinew of the thigh. Both episodes provide cultic ideologies for why something is not eaten. 6. The malevolent father-in-law imposes labors on the hero. Jason and Jacob both encounter a figure common in Greek myth, the malevolent father of the hero's future bride. Aietes' hostility is immediately apparent as soon as he learns Jason's reason for coming, whereas Laban's emerges only after Jacob has been with him for a month. Jason's interactions with Aietes take only a few days. Jacob's with Laban cover some 20 years. When Jason explains his quest for the fleece, Aietes considers slaying him on the spot before deciding on a deadly test. Jason must yoke 2 fire-breathing bulls, use them to plow and sow dragon's teeth, from which will spring a race of armored men he must slay. Aietes says he will give him the fleece when he accomplishes these labors. While first Laban greets Jacob with seeming warmth, quote, you are my bone and my flesh. A month later, we learn that he has made Jacob work the whole time without wages. Jacob then offers to work 7 years for Laban's beautiful younger daughter, Rachel, to which Laban agrees. Though Jason's labors are initially to win the fleece, they soon involve him with Medea. Both protagonists earlier accomplish acts resembling their labors. In their rituals to propitiate the goddess Rhea, the Argonauts leap and dance in full armor. As Hunter notes, they perform as a group what Jason will later enact by himself. Polyducus' defeat of Amukos, the Bebrycian king who makes guest box with him, predicts Aietes' treatments of the Argonauts and his defeat at their hand. The Argonauts seize his abundant flocks, corresponding to Jacob's departure from Laban. When Jacob arrives in Haran and sees Rachel approach with her sheep, by himself he rolls away the well stone, which the shepherds usually do as a group, implicitly defeating them and winning Rachel as his bride. The act corresponds to Jason's hurling a great stone among the sown men, which 4 men could together only raise an inch. 7. The bride employs magic and uses the mandrake roots. Medea's knowledge of drugs, pharmaca, and magic are central to her character. Jason could not perform Aietes' tasks without the help of Medea. Rachel also uses magic. Unable to bear children, she obtains mandrakes from Leah's son Reuben, which, as Altair observes, were thought to be aphrodisiac, to have the virtue of prompting fertility. She uses them to get pregnant. Central to Medea's magic is cutting roots. Apollonius depicts her cutting the Promethean drug, whose root resembles newly cut flesh. Hunter argues the Promethean plant is the mandrake. If we accept this identification, both wives are depicted with the same plant, aware of its magical properties, but putting it to different uses in their different contexts. Euripides' Medea knows how to use drugs to produce children, as she advises Aegeus. Do her unspecified drugs include the mandrake? Mandrake is otherwise mentioned in the Old Testament only in the Song of Songs, where it is again associated with sex and fertility. Apollonius' description of Medea seizing it strengthens the plant's identity as the mandrake. Quote, having plucked it, she tucked it away within her fragrant breastband, wound around her ambrosial breasts, reiterating the mandrake's sexual associations. 8. The hero executes his labors, aided by magic. Medea provides Jason with a drug, making him virtually invulnerable for a day, strengthening his might and his weapons. While he executes Aietes' labors, the drug protects him from the blasts of the fire-breathing bulls. Medea lulls the dragon to sleep with magic spells, sprinkling juniper branches in his eyes. When Rachel gives birth to Joseph, a consequence of the mandrake, Jacob, wishing to leave, suggests his wages be all the spotted and speckled goats. He then uses magic to produce abundant goats of the type specified. He has goats mate 4 rods of various trees and strips of bark. Most newly born are spotted, vastly increasing Jacob's holdings. His freshly cut plants correspond to Medea's root-cutting magic. 9. The father-in-law reneges on the terms of the labors. Assuming Jason could not perform his tasks, outraged when he does, Aietes will not hand over the fleece, breaking the terms of the contract he himself proposed. Laban reneges on terms in multiple sets of labors. When Jacob completes the 7 years for Rachel, Laban gives him her senator Leah. When Jacob and Laban agree what his wages should be for Rachel, Laban and his sons hide away all the speckled goats. 10. The bride steals her father's sacred article, the fleece, the household of gods. When Aietes breaks the terms, Jason and Medea steal the fleece. Rachel steals Laban's teraphim. which had not been previously mentioned, whereas the fleece is the intended goal throughout. From the standpoint of plot, the fleece is one of Alfred Hitchcock's MacGuffins. Argonautic myth never demonstrates its function or purpose, as nor does Jacob's myth do so for Laban's teraphim. In stealing the teraphim, Rachel replicates the central role of Medea, priestess of Hecate, helping Jason take the golden fleece. Theano, priestess of Athena in Troy, also corresponds. The transference of a cult from one people to another may underlie the myths of Medea and Rachel, though she is not depicted as a priestess. 11. The hero sneaks off in the night, and his wife, entourage, and the sacred articles. The father-in-law pursues with a band. Both protagonists now make off with their wives and the sacred articles. The dynamics of their flights and pursuit by the livid fathers closely correspond. Aeetes is enraged that Jason accomplished the labors and intuits that Medea helped him do so. Both Medea and Rachel make this shift in their relations with their fathers before they steal the sacred implements. Rachel steals the teraphim without Jacob's knowledge. Medea directs Jason on how to steal the fleece. Each father, enraged over the loss of the sacred article and his daughter's role in flight, launches an extensive pursuit in which his sons also take part. The pursuing Colchians split into multiple bands, one led by Aeetes' son, Apsyrtos. 12. The fathers-in-law of bands overtake them and negotiate a settlement. In both myths, a god appears, warning the pursuers not to press the chase too far. In the Argonautic, Hera sends lightning, assigned to the band of Colchians to cease the pursuit. God appears to Laban in a dream, saying, "Watch yourself, lest you speak to Jacob, either good or evil." Apsyrtos' contingent of Colchians and Laban and his sons nonetheless overtake the protagonists. In Apollonius, Aeetes does not pursue Jason, but requires his son and others to do so. In Herodotus, however, Aeetes himself pursues the Argonauts to Greece. Laban and his sons overtake Jacob in the hill country in Iliad. The Argonautic has then two sets of negotiations between the multiple pursuing parties representing Aeetes' interests. The negotiations between Laban and Jacob function like a composite of the Argonautic's two sets, what are closer to the second series at Drepane. In the Argonautic's first set, Medea fears Jason is plotting to leave her behind, since he now has the fleece. Jacob also refers to Rachel as expendable, though unintentionally. When Laban presses him over the theft of his household gods, Jacob says, "With whomever you find your gods, that person shall not live." Again, in the first set, the Argonauts, outnumbered, are on the verge of entering into battle when both sides agree to take terms, take oaths, and make a covenant. Since Jason satisfied Aeetes' own terms for obtaining the fleece, Apsyrtos determines he may keep it. More incensed by Medea's role, Aeetes has Apsyrtos attempt to negotiate her return, since she is to be turned over to a priestess of Artemis. Laban likewise criticizes Jacob at much greater length for taking his daughters than for taking his household gods. In between the two sets of negotiations is Argonautic myth's most jarring act, Jason's murder of Medea's brother, Apsyrtos. Medea converts her fear at being abandoned into a plot to murder him, paying hospitality in order to slay him at Artemis' temple, and slay a band of Colchians in similar fashion. When Jason and Medea later reach the Phaeacians, another group of Colchians demands Medea be handed over to them without discussion, threatening battle, warning of Aeetes' arrival, like Laban's blustering and refusal to concede any points to Jacob. Alcinous is determined to reconcile the two parties. If Medea and Jason have had sex, he rules, they should stay together. If not, she is to return to her father. Learning this, Jason and Medea, in a hurried consummation of their wedding, make love on the fleece. Rachel evades Laban's search by sitting on the teraphim in her camel saddle, claiming she can't rise because of her period. Both daughters profane their father's stolen sacred instruments, associating them with a bodily function at precisely the same points in their respective deaths. When Alcinous proclaims his judgment, he makes their respective parties swear oaths. Jacob and Laban swear in correspondingly international ways. Here, Genesis refers to Laban as Aramaean. Altair notes the encounter as a negotiation between national entities. Laban agrees to the terms, swearing by the god of Nahor, reiterating the cross-cultural nature of the pact. After negotiations with Laban determined Rachel's status, the myth seems to have resolved its most crucial issues, heading toward a calm denouement. But new fears and mysterious threats of danger arise, pervading this section. Jacob is alarmed to learn Esau approaches with 400 men. I suggest that Jason and Medea's murder of Apsyrtos during their flight underlies Genesis 32 and Jacob's overwhelming sense of guilt. Jacob divides his camp into two so that at least half may survive. Quote, I am afraid that he may come and destroy me. He will spare neither mother nor child. He fears Esau will act in much the way that Jason and Medea do act against the Bookins. The next morning, he again partitions his family. The thematic partitioning to buy time so that some may escape may correspond to the partitioning of Apsyrtus' corpse, Medea scattering its pieces in the ocean, prominent in several versions of Argonautic myth attested from the 5th century. In Apollonius, Jason cuts Apsyrtus' limbs off from ritual concerns to stop the corpse from taking vengeance on its killer, to convert the murder into a sacrifice to the Xonian deities. Here's in Medea's subsequent pollution corresponds to Jacob's emotional status as he prepares to encounter the brother he's serially victimized. During the night, left alone at the Kabak fort, in his most heroic encounter, he wrestles the man, partly resolving the tension from his underlying guilt. Though they wrestle to a draw, in a larger sense, Jacob is victor, winning a blessing from an opponent, as he did with Esau. This victory, won without provoking hostility, prepares him to face his brother. A nonviolent trajectory established, Jacob's myth brings the tense Esau cycle to a peaceful end, though Jacob still fears retaliation. But Esau abruptly acts counter to his assumptions. Quote, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell upon his neck, and they wept. Esau's change of circumstances and attitude make Jacob's fears unnecessary. The brothers embracing as family members after 20 years, the myth produces a sense of closure more like the recognition scenes that conclude romances. When Medea tells Circe she and Jason are in flight from her father's terrible threats, though she makes no mention of Apsyrtus' murder, the goddess fully perceives it nonetheless. When we consider Genesis 27 and 30 to 33 from the perspective of Argonautic myth, we are like Circe. Though Jacob's myth does not depict an act parallel to the slaying of Apsyrtus, we may nonetheless see its traces in Jacob's anxieties over confronting Esau and the intensity of Laban's anger and pursuit. If Genesis does transform a pre-existing Argonautic myth from the Greeks, why would it do so? On the one hand, the myth works at a similar basic level in both cultures, depicting a leader coming of age, accomplishing difficult labors, winning a wife who is the daughter of the foreign man of substance, and by taking possession of his father-in-law's sacred article, acquiring his prestige or figurative position. A number of elements, however, seem more typical of Greek culture than of the Old Testament, strengthening the likelihood that some form of Argonautic myth is earlier. Wrestling is identified with Jacob throughout his story. Emerging from Rebekah's womb, he grasps Esau's heel, a classic wrestling move, but also wordplay on his name, here understood as heel grabber or puller. When he wrestles the man at the Habak fort, he acts like a Greek hero, such as Heracles, who wrestles the river Achelos. Wrestling is especially associated with Odysseus, whose defeat of Philomeleides, who compels guests to wrestle, mirrors the Argonautic episode where Amycus compels visitors to box. The closest match for Jacob at Habak is Menelaus wrestling Proteus at the seashore. As with Jacob, Menelaus maintains his grip on his divine opponent and receives a blessing in prophecy. Since the Odyssey uses Menelaus wrestling Proteus to evoke Odysseus Nostos, Jacob's wrestling indirectly points to Odysseus. There is greater eros between Jacob and Rachel than other patriarchs and their wives. Jacob impulsively kisses Rachel on first seeing her. It is near impossible to imagine Isaac's servant doing so with Rebekah or Moses with Zipporah. Laban's deviousness aligns him not only with Aeetes, but with several other fathers in Greek myth who violate agreements with visiting heroes. From Laomedon cheating Heracles out of promised horses, close to Laban's attempted short-chaining of Jacob's flocks, to Algeas, Maios, Oinomas, and King Antiochus in Apollonius, king of Tyre, this is a common character type in Greek myth. Rebekah corresponds to Hera in Argonautic myth, and in the Iliad's account in 19 of how she sees Zeus to advance Eurystheus over Heracles, as Rebekah does Jacob over Esau. This sustained correspondence, paralleling Hera's roles from two separate myths, suggests Israelite culture euhemerives the Greek goddess in these acts by the key Genesis patriarch. Hera is already figured as Jason's helper in Odyssey 12. Magic is more common in Greek myths than in the Old Testament, frequent from Isia's Hecate to Circe, and a central facet of Medea's character in all versions of her myths. Rachel's use of the mandrake to cure her childlessness is an expertise Euripides' Medea shares. Jacob using magic to breed the modeled livestock corresponds to Jason accomplishing Aeetes' labors by magic. Differences between Israelite and Greek versions of this story are best seen as intentional. Genesis transforms the myth to reflect its own cultural preferences. Where Argonautic myth employs Greek myth's favorite protagonist, the hero, Genesis has a pastoralist patriarch, the pattern Abraham establishes. Individual motifs also suggest Genesis modifies Argonautic myths, typically heroic acts, to make them appropriate to Genesis pastoralists. Jason sails across the Aegean and Black Seas. Jacob travels by land on foot. Jason sows and harvests a crop of warrior men from dragon teeth. Jacob harvests spotted and speckled fields. Medea and Jason steal Aetes' golden fleece. Rachel steals Laban's teraphim. Medea has sacks lying on the golden fleece. Rachel sits on the teraphim, claiming she has her period. Israelite adaptation, through its different emphases, also serves as a commentary on and criticism of Greek culture, particularly evident in Jacob's defeat of Esau in securing his birthright and Isaac's blessing. Esau is cast in heroic tones, figured as a hunter. Like Heracles, he uses the bow. It is so hairy that Jacob wears oilskins to resemble him. Like Esau, Heracles is firstborn of twin brothers. Jacob's defeat of Esau, the more heroic figure, reflects a broader cultural preference visible throughout Genesis and in David's easy defeat of Philistine Goliath. If it is correct to see Esau as a Heracles figure, can we assume that some members of the ancient audience would recognize this? If so, Jacob's victory is a commentary on Greek culture, implied criticism of its values, and more emphatically, defeat, if by proxy, of its mythic protagonists, the ancient embodiments and foundation of its culture. Rebecca's repeated correspondence with Hera, where the same figure plots to victimize Heracles' Esau in multiple myths, supports this interpretation. Argonautic myth itself is clearly very ancient. While Homeric allusions to individual episodes abound, some question how complete pre-Homeric versions might be, since the Homeric epic does not name Medea. Others, however, assume that the Odyssey forms Circe, Nausicaa, and Antiphate's daughter by adapting a Medea figure. I conclude by arguing the Iliad does something similar in Book Louden. When Achilles sends Patroclus to Nestor's hut to learn the identity of their most recently wounded Greek, the episode develops a thematic focus on healers. The wounded man is Mokaon, son of Asclepios, greatest of all healers in Greek myths. Ironically, here the healer is wounded. The narrator marks this as the beginning of the trajectory that leads to Patroclus' death. For in a similar irony, he will also become the healer, wounded. When he leaves Nestor, Patroclus, who learned healing drugs from Achilles, who, like Jason, earlier learned from Chiron, he heals the wound Eurypylus by applying a pain-killing root, Rhisnon adunephaton. Between Patroclus' arrival and departure, the episode briefly focuses on two women with intriguing parallel names, Hecamede and Agamede. Hecamede serves Nestor, preparing a famous potion, mixing it into Nestor's equally famous cup. The potion and cup have received much attention through the ages, Hecamede has not. Later in the same day, in her second and final appearance in the Iliad, Hecamede prepares a hot bath for Mokaon. In preparing a potion, Kukeon, and a warm bath, both for restorative purposes, Hecamede performs two tasks closely identified with Medea. Her name's second component, Mede, is a form of Medea's name. Asking why Achilles cares who is wounded, Nestor offers his most prolix account of his own musical prowess against the Achaeans and their king, Augeas. He mentions Augeas' daughter, Agamede, who, quote, do as many drugs as the wide earth yields. Agamede and the parallel named Hecamede are, I suggest, only slight transformations of the name and character Medea. Agamede's expertise in drugs and her father's name, with its clear solar associations, point to Medea, granddaughter of Helios, and to Circe, daughter of Helios. Her description parallels Odyssean passages on Circe's knowledge, Kirkes polupharmakou. In this context, we might also consider the meaning of Laban's name. In the Odyssey, Circe mixes a kukeon as Hecamede, into which she slips pharmaca. If we are correct in identifying Agamede and Hecamede as figures associated with Medea, then Homeric epic is clearly well aware of her character. She is present in the Iliad by aposiopesis in these women and their names. Sophocles' Rhizdotomoi, the root cutters, has Medea cutting roots and saving juice from them, agreeing with the Argonautic's depiction of Medea cutting the Promethean root. In the Odyssey, Hermes' mole with its black root keeps Odysseus safe from Circe's spells, serving an analogous function as Medea's balm does for Jason, keeping him safe from the fire-breathing bolts. The Nostoi depicts Medea rejuvenating Aeson, quote, having boiled many drugs, barbica, in her golden cauldrons. Robin Lane Fox discusses an Etruscan vase that seems to illustrate the same event, datable to 630 BC. In several versions of her myth, this act of rejuvenation is Medea's iconic act of magic. In Nestor's meeting with Patroclus in Iliad 11, two marked contrasts for healers intersect. Like Mokao, Patroclus, though successfully healing Eurypylus, having learned how to do so from Chiron once removed, will himself become the healer who will be wounded. In the maddening delays that follow, Patroclus is still tending Eurypylus 4 books later. On the other hand, at Iliad 14, in Nestor's tent, Hecamede prepared a warm form of copper. While this is a standard task for a slave woman in her position, the episode's thematic focus on healers suggests additional implications. Nestor's own preternatural longevity is, I suggest, implicitly strengthened by his having Hecamede thematically linked to Medea, whose warm baths evoke her rejuvenation of aged Aeson. The links are reinforced when Nestor mentions Agamede, daughter of Helios, referencing Algeas, with her Circe-like knowledge of drugs. Thank you.